The mess hall erupted in laughter as Sergeant Rebecca Martinez pulled out her knitting needles during the 15-minute break. Purple yarn cascaded from her tactical vest pocket like some bizarre military accessory. Around her, battle-hardened Marines exchanged glances and smirked. Here was their communications specialist, fresh off a 12-hour surveillance rotation along the Syrian border, clicking away at what looked like a child's scarf. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What's next, Martinez? Gonna crochet us some body armor? Staff Sergeant Thompson called out, triggering another wave of chuckles. Rebecca's fingers never stopped moving. Click, loop, pull. The rhythm was hypnotic, almost mechanical. She'd completed 3 inches of intricate cable pattern while Thompson was still chewing his first bite of MRE beef stew. What none of them knew was that in exactly 72 hours, that same purple yarn would be wrapped around an enemy operative's throat, ending his life in 8 seconds flat. Camp Blackwater sat like a concrete tumor in the desert landscape of eastern Syria, 40 miles from the Turkish border. The forward operating base housed 200 Marines from the 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marine Regiment, tasked with monitoring insurgent activity and providing intelligence support to coalition forces. It was the kind of place where tempers ran hot, patience ran thin, and everyone counted the days until rotation home. Rebecca Martinez had been stationed at Blackwater for 14 months. As the base's senior communications specialist, she spent her days hunched over radio equipment, intercepting enemy transmissions and coordinating with intelligence units across the region. Her Arabic was flawless, a skill that had earned her rapid promotion and the respect of her commanding officers. But it was her off-duty hobby that made her the target of constant ridicule. The knitting had started innocently enough. During her first deployment to Afghanistan 3 years earlier, Rebecca's grandmother had sent her a care package containing yarn, needles, and a book titled Battlefield Calm: Meditative Crafts for Soldiers. Most Marines would have tossed it in the trash or sent it home. Rebecca, dealing with the stress of daily mortar attacks and the recent death of her squad leader, decided to give it a try. The first project was disastrous, a lopsided dish rag that looked more like abstract art than functional fabric. But something about the repetitive motion, the focus required to count stitches and follow patterns, quieted the chaos in her mind. By the end of that deployment, she'd completed 12 scarves, 8 hats, and a complex Afghan blanket that now covered her bunk back at Camp Pendleton. At Blackwater, the knitting had evolved into something more sophisticated. Rebecca had taught herself advanced techniques through online videos during her rare internet access periods. She could execute complex cable patterns, intricate lacework, and colorwork designs that would impress professional knitters. Her current project was a tribute to her fallen squad leader, a memorial throw featuring his name worked in purple letters against a field of desert tan. The other Marines didn't understand. To them, knitting represented everything soft and civilian that they'd left behind. They were warriors, forged in combat, defined by their ability to kill efficiently and protect each other in the harshest conditions imaginable. Watching their communication specialist click away at yarn during precious rest periods struck many as absurd, even offensive. "Martinez is losing it," Private First Class Jackson had whispered to his bunkmate after catching Rebecca knitting during a midnight guard shift. "6 months in this sandbox and she's playing housewife." Staff Sergeant Thompson was more direct. A career Marine with 3 combat deployments under his belt, he viewed Rebecca's hobby as a distraction at best, a security risk at worst. What if enemy snipers spotted the colorful yarn? What if the clicking needles interfered with radio communications? During morning briefings, he'd make pointed comments about maintaining tactical awareness and avoiding behaviors that compromise unit cohesion. The criticism intensified after the incident at Checkpoint Charlie. Rebecca had been monitoring radio traffic when insurgents launched a coordinated attack on a supply convoy 12 miles south of the base. While relaying coordinates and casualty reports, she'd continued knitting, an unconscious habit that helped her maintain focus during high-stress situations.
The convoy successfully repelled the attack with minimal casualties, thanks in part to Rebecca's precise communication, but all Thompson saw was a Marine who couldn't be bothered to put down her yarn during combat operations. "This stops now," he told her afterward, confiscating her knitting bag. "I don't care if it's your security blanket or whatever psychobabble the chaplain fed you, this is a war zone, not your grandmother's living room." Rebecca had retrieved the bag from Thompson's office that night, but the message was clear. Her hobby was viewed as weakness, a feminine indulgence that had no place in their masculine world of violence and brotherhood. She began knitting in secret, during night watch when others were sleeping, in supply closets between radio checks, anywhere she could find privacy. The secrecy made the mockery worse. Marines have an uncanny ability to sense vulnerability, and Rebecca's obvious embarrassment about her hobby made her an irresistible target. Jokes followed her everywhere. Someone left a baby's bib on her bunk with a note reading, "Rebecca's latest masterpiece." Another Marine replaced her ammunition with balls of pink yarn, claiming he was upgrading her arsenal. During PT sessions, drill instructors would shout cadences about knitting Martinez and her tactical yarn deployment. The psychological warfare was relentless and subtle. No direct confrontations that might warrant disciplinary action, just a constant stream of small humiliations designed to reinforce the message: you don't belong here. Rebecca absorbed it all with stoic silence, channeling her frustration into increasingly complex knitting patterns. The memorial throw grew larger, more intricate, as if each stitch were an act of defiance against those who questioned her place in their ranks. What her tormentors didn't realize was that knitting had taught Rebecca skills far more valuable than stress relief. The precise finger movements required for complex patterns had enhanced her manual dexterity. The ability to maintain intricate stitch counts while monitoring radio traffic had sharpened her multitasking abilities. Most importantly, the meditative aspects of the craft had taught her to remain calm under pressure, to maintain focus even when chaos surrounded her. These skills had already proven their worth in combat situations. During a mortar attack on the base 6 months earlier, Rebecca had continued relaying coordinates to artillery units while shrapnel shredded the communications tent around her. Her steady voice and precise directions had enabled a counter-battery fire mission that silenced the enemy guns. But all anyone remembered was that she'd been knitting when the attack began. The breaking point came during a base-wide inspection by Colonel Patricia Hayes, the regimental commander. Hayes was conducting a surprise visit to assess morale and operational readiness. As she toured the communications center, she discovered Rebecca's knitting supplies hidden behind a radio console. The colonel's expression was unreadable as she examined the memorial throw, running her fingers over the intricate pattern work.
"Impressive craftsmanship," Hayes had said quietly, ignoring Thompson's obvious discomfort. "My mother used to knit. Never mastered anything this complex." After Hayes departed, Thompson's anger was volcanic. He'd been humiliated in front of the regimental commander, made to look like an incompetent leader who couldn't maintain discipline among his troops. Rebecca bore the brunt of his fury through extra duties, harsh performance evaluations, and increasingly creative forms of professional sabotage. But Rebecca had learned something important during that inspection. Colonel Hayes hadn't seen weakness or inappropriate behavior. She'd recognized skill, artistry, and dedication, qualities that transcended gender stereotypes and arbitrary definitions of military bearing. For the first time since arriving at Blackwater, Rebecca began to view her knitting not as something to hide, but as a source of strength. She would need that strength sooner than she imagined. The intelligence briefing came at 0600 on a Tuesday morning that would change everything. Major William Garrett stood before a room of bleary-eyed Marines, his weathered face illuminated by the glow of satellite imagery projected onto the briefing room wall. The photos showed a cluster of buildings 30 kilometers northeast of their position, a suspected weapons cache that had been supplying insurgent cells throughout the region. "Operation Silent Thunder launches in 72 hours, Garrett announced, his gravelly voice cutting through the morning haze.
Intel suggests this facility has been coordinating attacks on coalition supply routes for the past 6 months. We're going to shut it down permanently. Rebecca studied the aerial photographs with professional interest. The compound was larger than typical insurgent hideouts, a sprawling complex of concrete buildings surrounded by defensive walls and watchtowers. Most concerning were the communication arrays visible on several rooftops. This wasn't just a weapons cache, it was a command center. Martinez, Garrett continued, you'll be monitoring enemy communications during the approach. Any chatter about our movement, you relay immediately. Intelligence indicates they have spotters positioned along our planned route. The mission parameters were straightforward. A 12 Marine squad would approach the compound under cover of darkness, neutralize any sentries, and plant explosive charges on the weapons storage areas. Air support would be minimal to avoid alerting nearby insurgent cells. Success depended on stealth, precision, and the element of surprise. What made this operation different was the terrain. The route to the target wound through a series of narrow valleys and rocky ridgelines that channeled movement into predictable corridors, perfect for ambushes. Intelligence had identified at least 3 probable overwatch positions where enemy scouts might be stationed to monitor coalition movements. Rules of engagement are weapons-free, Garrett emphasized. These people have been killing our allies for months. Anyone who compromises this mission gets neutralized immediately. As the briefing concluded and Marines filed out to begin mission preparation, Rebecca felt the familiar pre-combat mixture of anticipation and dread. She'd participated in dozens of similar operations, but something about this one felt different. Maybe it was the size of the target, or the complexity of the approach route, or simply the accumulated stress of 14 months in this desert wasteland. That evening, she retrieved her knitting from its hiding place and settled into her usual spot behind the communications equipment. The memorial throw was nearly complete. Just a few more rows of the border pattern and her tribute to Sergeant Collins would be finished. Her fingers moved automatically through the familiar motions while her mind processed the mission details. Private First Class Jennifer Kim discovered her there an hour later. Kim was one of the few Marines who didn't actively mock Rebecca's hobby, though she'd never shown any interest in learning about it either. Tonight was different. She approached hesitantly, drawn by the hypnotic rhythm of the needles.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "That's really beautiful," Kim said quietly, studying the intricate pattern work. "How long does something like that take?" Rebecca glanced up, surprised by the genuine interest in Kim's voice. "About 6 months for this one. It's a memorial piece." Kim settled onto a nearby equipment crate, watching Rebecca's fingers navigate the complex stitch sequence. "For Sergeant Collins? Yeah. He always said I should teach his wife to knit when I got back stateside. Figured I'd make her something instead." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, the only sounds coming from the distant hum of generators and the soft clicking of knitting needles. Kim had questions, lots of them, but seemed reluctant to interrupt the meditative quality of the moment. "Can you teach me?" Kim finally asked. "I mean, basic stuff, not anything fancy like that." Rebecca smiled, the first genuine smile she'd managed in weeks. "Sure, I've got extra needles back at my bunk. We could start with a simple scarf." What followed was Rebecca's first knitting lesson in a combat zone. Kim proved to be a quick learner, mastering the basic knit and purl stitches within an hour. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and soon 2 other Marines had wandered over to investigate the unusual sight of their colleagues engaged in domestic arts. Corporal David Santos was skeptical at first. A former gang member from East Los Angeles, he'd joined the Marines to escape a life of violence and drugs. Knitting seemed incompatible with everything he'd fought to become. But watching Kim's obvious satisfaction as her first few rows took shape, he found himself curious, despite his reservations. "This is some Zen shit," Santos muttered as he attempted his first stitches with exaggerated concentration, like meditation or whatever.
The impromptu knitting circle grew to include Lance Corporal Ashley Rodriguez, a combat medic from Texas who immediately grasped the therapeutic potential of the craft. Within 2 hours, 4 Marines were clicking away at yarn while discussing everything from home cooking to combat tactics. The conversation flowed naturally, unburdened by the usual military hierarchies and masculine posturing. Staff Sergeant Thompson discovered them at 2200 hours during his nightly security rounds. His expression cycled through disbelief, anger, and resignation as he observed 4 of his Marines engaged in what he considered the ultimate breach of military bearing. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, his voice sharp enough to cut Kevlar. "Martinez, bad enough you've turned into the base knitting club president, but now you're recruiting others?" The newly initiated knitters looked to Rebecca, unsure how to respond. Kim still clutched her needles defensively, as if Thompson might confiscate them on the spot. Santos attempted to hide his work behind a radio console, his street instincts recognizing a confrontation brewing. Rebecca stood slowly, her own knitting still in hand. "Just teaching some stress management techniques, Staff Sergeant. Nothing in regulations prohibits it." "Regulations?" Thompson's laugh was harsh and humorless. "Regulations don't cover every way Marines can embarrass themselves. You think this is what we're here for? Arts and crafts hour while insurgents are planning their next attack on American soldiers?" The accusation stung because it touched on Rebecca's deepest fear, that her hobby really was inappropriate, that she was somehow failing in her duties as a Marine. But looking at Kim's disappointed face, at Santos awkwardly trying to stuff yarn into his cargo pocket, she realized the criticism was fundamentally wrong. These Marines weren't being weakened by knitting. They were finding a moment of peace in an environment designed to strip away everything gentle and human. For 2 hours, they'd talked about their families, their hopes for after deployment, their dreams beyond the endless cycle of violence and survival. That wasn't weakness, it was the very humanity they were fighting to protect. "With respect, Staff Sergeant," Rebecca said carefully, "morale-building activities are part of maintaining unit readiness. These Marines are scheduled for the operation tomorrow night. If knitting helps them stay calm and focused, I consider that a tactical advantage." Thompson's face flushed red. Being challenged by a subordinate was bad enough, but having his authority questioned in front of other Marines was intolerable. He stepped closer, invading Rebecca's personal space in a classic intimidation move. "You want to talk tactics, Martinez? Here's a tactical reality check. Tomorrow night, you'll be monitoring enemy communications while 12 Marines risk their lives on your information. You think they'll trust intel from someone whose idea of combat preparation is playing with yarn?" The words hit harder than Thompson intended, not because they were true, but because they exposed the fundamental misunderstanding that had poisoned their relationship from the beginning. He saw knitting as evidence of misplaced priorities, a feminine indulgence that compromised military effectiveness. Rebecca knew it was the opposite, a skill that had sharpened her focus, steadied her nerves, and prepared her for the precise mental demands of her job. But she also knew that arguing further would only make things worse for Kim, Santos, and Rodriguez. They'd taken a risk by joining her knitting session, and she wouldn't let them suffer for her battles with their squad leader. "Understood, Staff Sergeant," she said simply, beginning to pack away her supplies. "We'll secure it for the evening." As the impromptu knitting circle dispersed, Kim approached Rebecca privately. "Thanks for teaching us," she whispered. "And don't let Thompson get to you. Half the squad thinks he's lost it anyway." Rebecca nodded, but Thompson's words continued echoing in her mind as she returned to her bunk. Tomorrow night, 12 Marines would depend on her ability to monitor enemy communications and provide accurate and timely intelligence under pressure. What Thompson didn't realize was that those qualities had been refined through thousands of hours of knitting, through the meditative focus required to execute complex patterns while maintaining situational awareness. The same skills that enabled her to count stitches while monitoring radio traffic would allow her to process enemy communications while tracking friendly positions. In less than 48 hours, she would prove just how wrong he was about tactical advantages. The final mission briefing took place at 1800 hours, 36 hours before Operation Silent Thunder would commence. Major Garrett had received updated intelligence that changed everything about their approach strategy. Satellite reconnaissance had identified increased activity around the target compound, including the arrival of what appeared to be high-value personnel in armored vehicles.
"Gentlemen, ladies," Garrett began, his expression grim, "we've got a golden opportunity here. Signals intelligence suggests we're looking at a regional command meeting. Taking down this facility could disrupt insurgent operations across 3 provinces." Rebecca studied the enhanced satellite imagery with growing concern. The compound's defensive preparations had intensified dramatically since the previous briefing. Additional sentries were visible on the perimeter walls, and thermal imaging revealed at least 15 personnel inside the main building, triple the expected occupancy. "Sir," Sergeant First Class Michael Torres raised his hand, "increased personnel means increased security. Are we adjusting team size?" Garrett shook his head. "Negative. Larger force means greater chance of detection during approach. We stick with the 12 Marine squad, but we're modifying the insertion route." The new plan was ambitious and dangerous. Instead of approaching from the south through the main valley, the squad would infiltrate from the east, using a series of narrow ravines that offered better concealment but required precise navigation in complete darkness. The route wound through terrain that intelligence had only recently mapped, with multiple choke points where a single enemy scout could compromise the entire mission. "Martinez, your role becomes critical here," Garrett continued, focusing on Rebecca. "We're going in blind through unfamiliar territory. Any enemy communications about patrol schedules, sentry rotations, or early warning systems could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure." Rebecca felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Communication intercept during movement was always challenging. Maintaining radio discipline while processing multiple frequency bands, distinguishing relevant intelligence from background chatter, all while navigating hostile terrain and darkness. She'd done it before, but never with stakes this high. The briefing concluded with equipment checks and final preparations. Each Marine would carry standard combat load, plus specialized demolition charges for the weapons cache. Rebecca's gear included portable intercept equipment, encrypted communication devices, and backup power supplies for extended operation. Hidden in her tactical vest, carefully wrapped in waterproof material, was a single ball of purple yarn and a pair of titanium knitting needles. The decision to bring knitting supplies on a combat mission would have seemed insane to most Marines. Rebecca's reasoning was purely practical. The complex hand movements required for intricate stitchwork had conditioned her fingers for precise manipulation under stress. The mental focus needed to maintain pattern sequences while processing environmental stimuli had enhanced her multitasking abilities. If the mission required extended periods of stationary observation, the meditative aspects of knitting would help her maintain alertness without succumbing to boredom or anxiety. 24 hours before mission launch, Rebecca discovered Private First Class Kim in the supply closet where she'd been secretly practicing her knitting. Kim had progressed beyond basic stitches, attempting a simple cable pattern that required careful attention to stitch manipulation. Her technique was rough but determined, fingers moving with the deliberate precision of someone completely absorbed in mastering a new skill. "You're getting good at that," Rebecca observed, settling beside Kim on a crate of MREs. "Cable work is tricky. Most people take months to get the tension right." Kim looked up, her face flushed with concentration and pride. "It's addictive. I keep thinking about the next row, planning ahead to make sure the pattern lines up correctly. Santos says it's like tactical planning, but with yarn." The comment struck Rebecca as more insightful than Kim probably realized. Knitting did require tactical thinking, anticipating problems several steps in advance, adapting patterns when circumstances changed, maintaining overall strategic vision while executing precise individual actions. These were exactly the mental skills that made elite Marines effective in combat situations. "I wanted to thank you," Kim continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Before you taught me this, I was having panic attacks. Couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The clicking sounds, the rhythm, it's like medicine." Rebecca nodded, understanding completely.
Combat stress manifested differently in every Marine, but the need for healthy coping mechanisms was universal. Some found relief in physical exercise, others in music or reading. Kim had found her solution in the meditative repetition of knitting stitches. Their conversation was interrupted by approaching footsteps. Corporal Santos appeared in the doorway, followed by Lance Corporal Rodriguez. Both carried small bundles of yarn and needles, seeking the same quiet space for practice away from potential ridicule. "Knitting club meeting," Santos grinned, settling cross-legged on the floor. His latest project was a simple beanie in desert camouflage colors, practical enough that even Thompson couldn't criticize its military application. Rodriguez had chosen a more ambitious first project, a pair of fingerless gloves designed to provide warmth without compromising trigger finger mobility. Her background as a combat medic had given her steady hands and patience for detailed work, qualities that translated perfectly to advanced knitting techniques. For the next hour, the four Marines sat in companionable silence, needles clicking in synchronized rhythm. The sound was hypnotic, almost tribal, a percussive ensemble created by focused concentration and shared purpose. Rebecca found herself relaxing for the first time in weeks, tension draining from muscles she hadn't realized were clenched. The peaceful moment shattered when Staff Sergeant Thompson burst through the door, his face contorted with fury at finding what he probably considered the worst breach of military discipline in his 15 years career. 4 Marines, including his senior communications specialist, played with yarn less than 24 hours before a critical combat operation. "Are you kidding me?" Thompson's voice cracked with outrage. "Martinez, get your ass up right now!" Rebecca stood slowly, instinctively positioning herself between Thompson and the other Marines. Kim's knitting trembled in her hands, while Santos attempted to fade into the shadows behind a stack of supply boxes. Rodriguez maintained her medic's composure, but gripped her needles like surgical instruments. "Staff Sergeant, we were just—" "I don't want to hear it," Thompson cut her off. "You think this is a joke? Tomorrow night, Marines die if you screw up communications intercept, and you're sitting here playing house with your little sewing circle?"
The accusation was so fundamentally wrong that Rebecca felt anger flare in her chest, not at the personal attack, but at the implication that her dedication to the mission was somehow compromised. She'd spent the past month preparing for Operation Silent Thunder, studying enemy communication patterns, memorizing frequency assignments, rehearsing intercept procedures until they were automatic. "With respect, Staff Sergeant," Rebecca said quietly, "my preparation for tomorrow's mission is complete. This activity enhances my manual dexterity and mental focus. It's a performance enhancement, not a distraction." Thompson stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Performance enhancement? You want to know what enhances performance? Weapons training, combat drills, studying enemy tactics, not sitting around like a bunch of old ladies at a quilting bee." "Staff Sergeant," Rodriguez interjected, her medic training overriding her instinct to avoid confrontation. "Studies show that fine motor activities can improve—" "Did I ask for your medical opinion, Lance Corporal?" Thompson snapped. "All of you, secure this kindergarten bullshit and get back to actual military preparation. Martinez, you're restricted to quarters until mission brief tomorrow. Maybe some isolation will help you remember what you're supposed to be focused on." As the impromptu knitting group dispersed, Rebecca caught Kim's eye and nodded slightly, a gesture meant to convey that standing up for something important was always worth the consequences. Kim responded with a barely perceptible smile before hurrying away with her needles hidden beneath her uniform blouse. Alone in her quarters, Rebecca completed the final rows of Sergeant Collins' memorial throw. Each stitch was a meditation on loss, sacrifice, and the bonds that connected Marines across time and distance. Collins would never see this tribute to his memory, but his widow would understand the love and respect woven into every fiber. Tomorrow night, Rebecca would carry a piece of that yarn into combat, not as sentiment or superstition, but as a tool refined through months of practice into something potentially lethal.
Thompson's mockery had revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of what knitting had taught her. It wasn't about femininity or domestic comfort. It was about precision, focus, and the deadly patience required to wait for the perfect moment to act. In 18 hours, that moment would arrive. Operation Silent Thunder launched at 0200 hours under a moonless sky that turned the Syrian desert into an ocean of black velvet. 12 Marines moved through the darkness like ghosts, their night vision equipment casting everything in an eerie green glow. The modified insertion route took them through terrain so treacherous that each step required careful consideration. Loose shale that could trigger rock slides, hidden crevices deep enough to break ankles, and narrow passages where a single misstep could alert enemy sentries miles away. Rebecca moved in the middle of the formation, her portable intercept equipment humming quietly against her back. The specialized radio array could monitor 15 different frequencies simultaneously, automatically flagging key words in Arabic, Farsi, and 3 regional dialects. Her earpiece provided a constant stream of background chatter, taxi dispatchers in Damascus, commercial radio stations, and the occasional burst of military communication that required immediate analysis. Staff Sergeant Thompson led the squad with grim determination, his earlier confrontation with Rebecca apparently forgotten in favor of mission focus. Professional Marines could compartmentalize personal conflicts when lives are at stake, and Thompson was nothing if not professional. He'd made his disapproval clear, but now his job was getting his people to the target and back alive. The first checkpoint came 90 minutes into the movement. According to the mission timeline, they should have covered 3 kilometers and reached a distinctive rock formation that marked the entrance to the final approach valley. Instead, they found themselves staring at a landscape that bore no resemblance to the satellite imagery from their briefing. "Navigation error," whispered Sergeant Torres, studying his GPS unit with growing frustration. "We're 800 meters south of the planned route." Thompson's jaw tightened. Navigation mistakes in hostile territory weren't just embarrassing, they were potentially fatal. The carefully planned route had been designed to avoid known enemy observation posts and patrol areas. Wandering off course meant entering terrain that hadn't been properly reconnoitered, where ambushes and improvised explosive devices could be waiting around any ridgeline. Thompson, his voice came through the tactical radio, barely audible even through the earpiece. Any enemy communications indicating patrol activity in this sector. Rebecca had been monitoring radio traffic since before the mission launch, her trained ear separating relevant intelligence from civilian background noise. The intercept equipment showed dozens of active frequencies, but most carried the mundane conversations of a region trying to maintain normal life despite ongoing conflict. What she didn't report was the unusual pattern she'd noticed in the civilian communications. 3 different taxi services had reported route changes in the past hour, all avoiding the same general area northeast of their position. Local drivers often have better intelligence about insurgent activity than military units, and their avoidance patterns could indicate anything from improvised roadblocks to active combat operations. The squad pressed forward, following Torres as he attempted to navigate back to their planned route using terrain features barely visible even with night vision enhancement. The landscape was a maze of wadis and ridgelines that looked identical in the pale green glow of their equipment. Every shadow could conceal an enemy position. Every sound might be the prelude to contact. Rebecca's intercept equipment began picking up increased radio traffic as they approached the target area. Short, coded transmissions in Arabic that followed military communication protocols rather than civilian patterns. Her pulse quickened as she recognized the distinctive rhythm of security reports, perimeter checks, status updates, and coordination messages that indicate active enemy operations. Thompson, he raised his fist, bringing the entire formation to an immediate halt. In the sudden silence, every Marine strained to identify potential threats. The distant sound of vehicle engines, voices carried on desert wind, or the metallic click of weapons being readied for action. Rebecca's equipment continued intercepting enemy transmissions, and she began the delicate process of analyzing communication patterns without betraying their position through electronic emissions. The coded messages were brief but frequent, suggesting either routine security checks or active coordination of defensive preparations.
Her fingers moved unconsciously through knitting motions as she processed the intelligence, a habit so ingrained that she wasn't even aware of it. The complex hand movements helped her maintain focus while juggling multiple information streams, a skill developed through thousands of hours of practicing intricate stitch patterns while monitoring radio traffic. "I count at least 3 separate enemy radio operators," Rebecca reported quietly. "Communication patterns suggest they're coordinating perimeter security. Transmission timing indicates they're following scheduled check-in protocols." Thompson absorbed this information with the calculating mind of a career infantry marine. Scheduled security checks meant predictable timing, which created opportunities for infiltration between reporting periods. But it also meant their target was taking defensive precautions seriously, suggesting they knew coalition forces were operating in the area. The squad resumed movement, advancing more cautiously now that enemy presence was confirmed. They had covered another kilometer when Torres suddenly froze, his weapon trained on a rocky outcropping ahead of their position. Through his night vision scope, he detected the distinctive shape of a human figure concealed among the boulders. Every Marine in the formation instantly went to ground, weapons oriented toward the potential threat. In the green-tinted world of their night vision equipment, details were difficult to distinguish, but the silhouette was unmistakably human. Someone positioned to observe the very route they were using to approach the target compound. Rebecca's intercept equipment immediately began scanning for local radio transmissions. If this was an enemy scout, he might be preparing to report their presence to his commanders. The success of Operation Silent Thunder depended on maintaining surprise until the assault team was in position to neutralize the weapons cache. "Single personnel, approximately 50 meters northeast," Torres whispered through the tactical network. "No movement detected. Could be a static observation post." Thompson faced a critical decision. Attempting to bypass the scout position risked being detected and reported. Direct engagement would eliminate the immediate threat, but might alert other enemy forces through missed radio check-ins or the sound of gunfire. Either choice carried significant risks for mission success. "Martinez, any communications from that position?" Thompson asked. Rebecca fine-tuned her intercept equipment, focusing on the frequency spectrum most likely to carry short-range tactical communications. Her training had taught her to distinguish between different types of radio traffic, the characteristic patterns of military reports versus civilian conversations, the electronic signatures of various equipment types, and the subtle indicators that reveal operational security procedures. "Negative radio emissions from the target area," she reported, "but I'm detecting what might be a scheduled check-in frequency. If he's supposed to report in, we'll know soon." The minutes crawled past with agonizing slowness. Each Marine remained motionless, weapons trained on the suspected scout position, while Rebecca monitored enemy communications for any indication that their presence had been detected. The desert night was filled with small sounds, insects, wind through rock formations, and the distant hum of generators from populated areas. At 03:47 hours, Rebecca's equipment intercepted a brief transmission in Arabic from the vicinity of the scout position. The message was coded, but the timing and duration matched typical security report protocols. Her blood ran cold as she realized what this meant. The enemy scout had just transmitted their location to his commanders. "Thompson," she whispered urgently, "we're blown. Scout just transmitted on enemy frequency. Duration and timing suggest a position report." The squad leader's response was immediate and decisive. "Torres, neutralize that position. Silent takedown only. The rest of the squad maintain overwatch." Torres began the deadly process of stalking an enemy combatant through terrain that offered minimal concealment. His approach required perfect balance between speed and stealth, moving quickly enough to prevent additional enemy reports while remaining quiet enough to avoid detection until the last possible moment.
Rebecca continued monitoring enemy communications, hoping to provide early warning if additional hostile forces were responding to the scouts' report. Her intercept equipment showed increased activity on several frequencies, suggesting that the enemy was indeed reacting to information about coalition movement in their operational area. What happened next would define the rest of Operation Silent Thunder and change Rebecca's life forever. Torres had covered 30 meters when his foot dislodged a loose rock, sending it clattering down the slope with a sound that seemed to echo across the entire desert. The enemy scout immediately went to alert status, raising what appeared to be a rifle while simultaneously reaching for radio equipment to transmit additional intelligence. The distance was too great for Torres to cover before the scout could fire or radio for help. Thompson faced the nightmare scenario every squad leader dreaded, his point man exposed in open terrain while an enemy combatant preparing to compromise the entire mission. Rebecca made a decision that bypassed conscious thought, driven by months of specialized training and an intimate understanding of her own capabilities. She reached into her tactical vest and extracted a length of purple yarn and a single titanium knitting needle, tools that had been mocked and ridiculed by Marines who couldn't understand their deadly potential. In one fluid motion, she rose from her concealed position and sprinted toward the enemy scout. The enemy combatant was focused on Torres, unaware that death was approaching from an entirely different direction. Rebecca's fingers worked automatically, transforming the innocent purple yarn into a precisely engineered killing tool. The complex knots and loops she created in those few seconds of approach were based on techniques developed through thousands of hours of practicing intricate cable patterns, motions so automatic they required no conscious thought. The enemy scout never saw her coming. Rebecca's attack was swift, silent, and utterly lethal, utilizing skills that no military training manual had ever documented, but which months of dedicated practice had refined to murderous perfection. 8 seconds. That's how long it took for the purple yarn that had been mocked by an entire Marine company to become the instrument of an enemy combatant's death. The desert fell silent once again, but Operation Silent Thunder was far from over. The body of the enemy scout lay motionless among the rocks, the purple yarn still wrapped around his throat in an intricate pattern that would have impressed any master knitter. Rebecca knelt beside the corpse, her hand steady as she carefully extracted her improvised weapon and returned it to her tactical vest. The titanium needle had served its purpose
perfectly, puncturing the carotid artery with surgical precision while the yarn maintained pressure until consciousness faded. Staff Sergeant Thompson reached her position 30 seconds later, his night vision equipment revealing details that would forever change his understanding of the Marine he'd been tormenting for months. The enemy scout was a professional soldier, not some untrained insurgent. His equipment included advanced radio gear, night vision technology, and a sniper rifle that could have eliminated half their squad from his concealed position. "Jesus Christ, Martinez," Thompson whispered, staring at the scene with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "How did you?" Rebecca was already moving, checking the dead scout's radio equipment for intelligence about enemy defensive preparations. Her fingers worked with the same precise efficiency she demonstrated with knitting needles, quickly accessing the device's memory to extract recently transmitted messages. "He got off one transmission before I reached him," she reported quietly. "Basic position report, no details about our strength or intended target. We still have operational surprise, but they know coalition forces are in the area." Torres arrived at the scene moments later, his own weapon trained outward to provide security while Thompson and Rebecca processed the tactical situation. His expression was unreadable as he observed the enemy combatant's body and the subtle evidence of how he died. "Strangled with yarn," Torres muttered, more to himself than to his teammates. "That's a new one for the after-action report." Rebecca continued examining the scout's equipment, her mind automatically cataloging details that might prove tactically relevant. The radio was sophisticated, military-grade encryption capability, and multiple frequency presets that suggested coordination with a larger network.
The sniper rifle was chambered for .308 caliber with a high-quality scope, indicating this wasn't just an observation post but an active interdiction position. "Thompson," she said, studying thermal imagery on the scout's night vision equipment, "this guy wasn't just watching for coalition movement. He was positioned to engage targets of opportunity. If Torres had gotten much closer, we'd be dealing with casualty evacuation instead of mission continuation." The squad leader absorbed this information with growing appreciation for how catastrophic the situation could have become. A wounded Marine would have required immediate medical evacuation, compromising the entire operation and potentially exposing other coalition units to enemy surveillance networks. "Outstanding work, Martinez," Thompson said quietly, and Rebecca could hear genuine respect in his voice for the first time since her arrival at Camp Blackwater. That was some of the most professional tactical thinking I've seen in 15 years. The compliment meant more than Thompson probably realized. For months, Rebecca had endured constant criticism about her fitness for combat operations, her dedication to mission success, and her understanding of what it meant to be a Marine. With 8 seconds of lethal action, she'd proven that competence came in forms her critics had never imagined. The squad resumed movement toward the target compound, now acutely aware that enemy defensive preparations were more sophisticated than intelligence had suggested. Rebecca's intercept equipment continued monitoring radio traffic, searching for any indication that additional hostile forces were responding to the scout's final transmission. What she discovered was deeply troubling. The enemy communication network was far more extensive than satellite reconnaissance had revealed, with multiple radio operators coordinating activities across a wide geographical area. The weapons cache they'd been sent to destroy was apparently just one component of a larger operational complex. "Thompson," Rebecca whispered as they approached the final rally point, "I'm intercepting communications that suggest this target is bigger than we thought. Multiple facilities, coordinated security, and what sounds like a senior leadership meeting in progress." The squad leader halted the formation while he considered this new intelligence. Their mission parameters were specific: plant demolition charges on identified weapons storage areas and withdraw before enemy forces could respond. Engaging a larger target would require different tactics, additional resources, and probably air support that wasn't currently available. But they were also presented with an unprecedented opportunity. If enemy leadership was indeed meeting at this location, successful interdiction could disrupt insurgent operations across the entire region, the kind of strategic victory that justifies significant tactical risks. "How confident are you in that assessment?" Thompson asked. Rebecca had been analyzing enemy communications for over 3 years, first in Afghanistan and now throughout her deployment to Syria. She could distinguish between routine security chatter and the distinctive patterns that indicate high-level coordination. The radio traffic she was intercepting had all the characteristics of operational planning at the regional command level. "Very confident," she replied. "Communication protocols, message frequency, and coordination complexity all indicate senior leadership presence. This isn't just a weapons cache, it's a command center." Thompson made the decision that would define the rest of his career. Instead of proceeding with their original limited mission, he opted to request immediate reinforcement and air support for an expanded operation targeting the enemy command structure. "All stations, this is Thunder 6, he transmitted to the Tactical Operations Center back at Camp Blackwater. "Request immediate fire support and QRF deployment. We have confirmed enemy leadership targets. Repeat, confirmed enemy leadership targets." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within minutes, Rebecca's radio equipment was coordinating with fast-moving aircraft, additional Marine ground units, and artillery batteries positioned throughout the region. What had begun a small unit infiltration mission was rapidly escalating into a major combined arms operation. But success still depended on maintaining tactical surprise until all assets were in position. Any premature enemy awareness could result in the escape of high-value targets and the loss of a strategic opportunity that might not present itself again for months. Rebecca's role became critical in ways the original mission planning had never anticipated. She was now the primary intelligence link between dispersed coalition forces, monitoring enemy communications while coordinating friendly units through hostile territory. The complexity required simultaneous processing of dozens of information streams while maintaining perfect situational awareness.
Her fingers began moving through familiar knitting motions as she worked, an unconscious habit that helped her maintain focus during high-stress multitasking. The muscle memory of complex stitch patterns allowed her conscious mind to concentrate entirely on the tactical situation while her hands provided the steady rhythm that kept her calm and centered. Torres noticed the subtle movement and smiled grimly. "Still knitting, even in combat," he observed quietly. "Especially in combat," Rebecca replied, without taking her attention off the radio intercept equipment. "Pattern work trains your brain for exactly this kind of coordination challenge." The comment triggered a moment of recognition for Torres. Watching Rebecca seamlessly coordinate multiple radio frequencies while tracking friendly unit positions, he began to understand what she'd been trying to explain about the tactical applications of her hobby. The mental discipline required for complex knitting translated directly to battlefield communication management. Over the next 2 hours, Rebecca orchestrated one of the most successful coalition operations of the entire Syrian deployment. Her ability to monitor enemy communications while coordinating friendly forces enabled a precision assault that eliminated an entire insurgent command structure without civilian casualties or friendly fire incidents. The weapons cache was destroyed as originally planned, but the operation also captured 3 high-value targets, recovered extensive intelligence about regional insurgent networks, and disrupted enemy operations across an area covering 2 provinces. The strategic impact would be felt for months, fundamentally altering the security situation throughout eastern Syria. When the shooting stopped and damage assessment began, Major Garrett personally flew to the target site to debrief the operation. His expression as he reviewed the tactical success was a mixture of professional satisfaction and personal amazement at how a routine mission had become such a significant victory. "Martinez," he said, studying the after-action reports, "your communication coordination was absolutely flawless. I've never seen better integration of intercept intelligence with tactical execution. How did you manage that level of complexity under combat conditions?" Rebecca glanced at Thompson, who nodded encouragingly. The squad leader's attitude toward her had undergone a complete transformation during the operation, as he witnessed firsthand the professional competence he'd been questioning for months. "Knitting practice, sir," Rebecca replied honestly. "Complex pattern work trains your brain for exactly the kind of multitasking required in this type of operation. Motor skills, pattern recognition, maintaining focus under pressure, it's all the same mental discipline." Garrett's eyebrows rose slightly, but he was too experienced an officer to dismiss any training method that produced results this impressive. "Knitting," he repeated thoughtfully. "I'll have to remember that for future training recommendations." The return journey to Camp Blackwater was triumphant in ways that had nothing to do with military success. For the first time since arriving in Syria, Rebecca felt completely accepted by her fellow Marines. The skepticism and mockery that had defined her relationships for months had been replaced by genuine respect for her tactical competence and professional dedication. Private First Class Kim was waiting at the landing zone when their helicopter touched down, her face bright with excitement at seeing her knitting instructor return safely from combat. Behind her stood Corporal Santos and Lance Corporal Rodriguez, both clutching small bundles of yarn they'd been working on during the operation. "Did you really strangle an enemy scout with purple yarn?" Kim asked, breathlessly, having heard rumors from the communications personnel who'd monitored the mission. Rebecca smiled, pulling the carefully cleaned length of yarn from her tactical vest. The purple fiber looked innocent enough in the harsh fluorescent lighting of the base, but she knew it would always carry the memory of 8 deadly seconds in the Syrian desert. 8 seconds, she confirmed quietly. "Same yarn you helped me practice cable patterns with last week." Turns out precision fingerwork has applications we never discussed in our knitting lessons. Thompson approached the group, his expression serious but no longer hostile.
In his hands, he carried the memorial throw Rebecca had completed for Sergeant Collins, the intricate piece that had taken months to create and had become a symbol of everything he'd misunderstood about her dedication to their unit. "Martinez," he said formally, "I owe you an apology. I was wrong about your priorities, wrong about your commitment to this unit, and wrong about the tactical value of your training methods. That throw represents more professionalism and military bearing than I recognized." He paused, studying the complex pattern work with new appreciation for the skill and dedication it represented. "With your permission, I'd like to recommend you for commendation. What you accomplished tonight was extraordinary by any standard." Rebecca accepted the throw gratefully, running her fingers over stitches that now carried additional meaning beyond their original memorial purpose. Each loop and cable represented not just tribute to a fallen comrade, but proof that competence and dedication could take forms that traditional military thinking had never imagined. "Thank you, Staff Sergeant," she replied, "but the real lesson here isn't about knitting. It's about not dismissing skills just because you don't understand their applications." As the group dispersed toward their quarters, Rebecca realized that Operation Silent Thunder had accomplished far more than the destruction of an enemy weapons cache. It had proven that excellence could emerge from unexpected sources, that preparation took many forms, and that 8 seconds of perfect execution could validate months of patient practice. The purple yarn that had been mocked throughout Camp Blackwater would become legendary, not as a symbol of feminine weakness, but as proof that deadly competence could be developed through the most unlikely training methods. And somewhere in Texas, Sergeant Collins' widow would receive a memorial throw created by hands that had learned to kill with the same precision they brought to every stitch. 3 weeks after Operation Silent Thunder, Camp Blackwater had transformed into something resembling a knitting academy. What started as Rebecca's secret hobby had evolved into an unofficial training program that attracted Marines from across the base. The supply sergeant had quietly requisitioned yarn in military-appropriate colors, and evening hours buzzed with the soft clicking of needles as hardened combat veterans learned to execute complex stitch patterns. Colonel Patricia Hayes arrived for an unscheduled inspection on a Tuesday morning, her helicopter touching down just as the daily operations briefing concluded. Hayes had built her reputation on unconventional thinking and innovative training methods, but nothing in her 22-year career had prepared her for what she discovered in the Camp Blackwater mess hall.
43 Marines sat in organized groups, their breakfast trays pushed aside to make room for balls of yarn and partially completed projects. The scene looked like something from a civilian community center, except these participants wore desert camouflage and carried loaded weapons. Conversation flowed naturally between technical discussions of cable patterns and tactical analysis of recent patrol operations. Staff Sergeant Thompson occupied the central table, his massive hands surprisingly delicate as he worked on what appeared to be a tactical gear bag knitted in desert tan colors. Around him, junior Marines sought advice on everything from stitch counting to yarn selection, treating him with the same respect they'd show during weapons training. "Staff Sergeant." Colonel Hayes approached Thompson's table, her expression carefully neutral. "Interesting morning activity. Care to explain what I'm observing?" Thompson rose immediately to attention, his knitting needles still clutched in one hand. "Ma'am, this is voluntary stress management training based on techniques developed by Sergeant Martinez. We've documented measurable improvements in fine motor control, sustained concentration, and tactical multitasking abilities." Hayes studied the gathering with the analytical mind that had earned her rapid promotion through Marine Corps leadership ranks. These weren't Marines goofing off or avoiding duties. They were engaged in focused skill development that clearly had command support and structured organization. "Sergeant Martinez," Hayes called across the mess hall, "please join us." Rebecca approached with confident bearing, carrying a partially completed project that immediately caught the colonel's attention. The piece was clearly functional military equipment, a communication harness designed to organize radio gear and antenna connections. The knitting technique was so advanced that it resembled engineering more than traditional handicraft. "Ma'am," Rebecca stood at attention,
We've been developing tactical applications for advanced fiber arts training. The motor skills and mental discipline transfer directly to combat communication operations. Hayes examined the communication harness with growing interest. The construction was ingenious, flexible enough to accommodate different body types and equipment configurations, yet sturdy enough to withstand field conditions. More importantly, it represented thinking that went far beyond following established procedures to creating innovative solutions for operational challenges. "Show me," Hayes commanded simply. What followed was a 30-minute demonstration that would revolutionize training doctrine throughout the Marine Corps. Rebecca guided Colonel Hayes through basic knitting techniques while explaining their tactical applications. The repetitive hand motions that build muscle memory for complex equipment manipulation, the pattern recognition skills that enhanced situational awareness during multi-frequency radio monitoring, the meditative focus that maintained performance under extreme stress. But the real revelation came when Hayes attempted the exercises herself. Within minutes, she understood viscerally what Rebecca had been trying to explain. The mental state required for complex knitting was identical to the focused concentration needed for battlefield decision-making. The finger dexterity developed through intricate stitch work translated directly to weapons maintenance and technical equipment operation. "Outstanding," Hayes murmured, her needles clicking through a simple pattern while her mind processed the broader implications. "This isn't craft training, it's cognitive enhancement disguised as hobby activity." Private First Class Kim had been documenting the program's development through careful record-keeping that would have impressed any research scientist. Her data showed measurable improvements in marksmanship scores, equipment maintenance proficiency, and stress management indicators among Marines who participated in regular knitting sessions. "Colonel," Kim presented her findings with the confidence of someone who'd discovered something genuinely important. "We've recorded an average 15% improvement in fine motor tasks among participants. Combat communications efficiency has increased by 22%, and medical evaluations show significantly reduced stress hormone levels." Hayes reviewed Kim's documentation with increasing amazement. The improvements weren't marginal. They represented substantial enhancement of core military competencies through methods that no training manual had ever considered. More importantly, the program was entirely voluntary and self-sustaining, requiring minimal resources while producing quantifiable results. "I want detailed reports on this program forwarded to Marine Corps Training and Education Command," Hayes announced. "If these results are replicatable across different units, we're looking at the biggest training innovation in decades." The announcement triggered excited conversation throughout the mess hall, but Hayes wasn't finished. She'd been observing the social dynamics of the knitting groups, noting how the activity seemed to break down traditional military hierarchies in ways that enhanced rather than undermined unit cohesion. Corporal Santos had become an unofficial instructor for newer participants. His background in gang culture provided unique insights into the psychological benefits of productive group activities. His students included Marines of all ranks, creating teaching relationships that would have been impossible within normal military structure. "Santos," Hayes addressed the former gang member directly, "you're running instruction sessions?" "Yes, ma'am," Santos replied confidently. "Turns out teaching people to knit uses the same skills as teaching combat techniques. Breaking down complex processes into manageable steps, correcting mistakes without destroying confidence, building muscle memory through repetition." Lance Corporal Rodriguez had taken the program in yet another direction, developing specialized patterns for medical applications. Her latest project was a series of compression sleeves designed to support joint injuries common among Marines carrying heavy equipment loads. The knitting technique allowed for graduated compression that commercial products couldn't match. "Rodriguez, explain your medical applications," Hayes commanded. The combat medic's presentation was thorough and professionally compelling. She'd identified dozens of ways that custom-knitted items could enhance military medicine, from compression garments that prevent injury to specialized covers that protect sensitive medical equipment in desert conditions. More importantly, the knitting process itself provided therapeutic benefits for Marines dealing with combat stress and physical rehabilitation.
We've had 3 Marines with hand injuries from IED explosions use knitting as physical therapy, Rodriguez reported. The controlled movements help rebuild fine motor control, while the mental focus assists with PTSD symptoms. It's more effective than traditional occupational therapy because Marines see it as skill development rather than medical treatment. Hayes was beginning to understand that what she'd initially perceived as an unusual hobby had evolved into a comprehensive enhancement program addressing multiple aspects of military performance. The physical benefits were obvious, but the psychological and social advantages were equally significant. The program had created a unique social space within the rigid hierarchy of military life. Marines who might never interact outside formal duty relationships found common ground in shared learning experiences. Senior enlisted personnel discovered they could learn from junior Marines who possessed superior knitting skills, creating mentorship opportunities that flowed in directions unusual for military organizations. More importantly, the activity provided a constructive outlet for the aggressive energy that sometimes caused disciplinary problems in forward-deployed units. Marines who might otherwise spend free time in destructive behaviors were instead engaged in productive skill development that enhanced their military capabilities. Thompson, Hayes addressed the squad leader who'd undergone the most dramatic transformation. How has this program affected unit readiness and discipline? Thompson's response was immediate and enthusiastic. Ma'am, we've had 0 disciplinary incidents among program participants in 3 weeks. Equipment maintenance scores have improved across the board. Most importantly, unit cohesion is the strongest I've seen in 15 years of service. He paused, choosing his words carefully for what would become part of the official record. I initially opposed this program because I misunderstood its applications. I thought Sergeant Martinez was introducing civilian influences that would undermine military culture. Instead, she created training methods that enhance core military competencies while strengthening the bonds between Marines. Hayes spent the remainder of her inspection observing knitting sessions, interviewing participants, and reviewing documentation that would support her recommendation for program expansion. Every conversation reinforced her conclusion that Camp Blackwater had accidentally discovered training methods with applications far beyond their small forward operating base. The breakthrough came during her final meeting with Major Garrett when she learned about Rebecca's performance during Operation Silent Thunder. The after-action reports described communication coordination that exceeded anything in contemporary military training literature, achieved by a Marine whose preparation included thousands of hours of knitting practice. Garrett, Hayes said slowly, "You're telling me that Martinez strangled an enemy combatant with yarn she'd been knitting during off-duty hours?" 8 seconds, Garrett confirmed. Most professional combat action I've witnessed in 20 years. The hand coordination and mental focus she developed through knitting translated directly to lethal application under extreme stress. Hayes understood immediately that she was looking at evidence for training methods that could revolutionize military preparation across all specialties. If complex hand movements practiced through knitting could enhance everything from marksmanship to communication operations, similar principles might apply to vehicle maintenance, weapons systems operation, and countless other military occupational specialties. "I want Martinez transferred to Quantico immediately," Hayes announced. "Marine Corps University needs to document these methods and develop curriculum for implementation across the force. This could change how we think about skill development entirely." The order created mixed emotions throughout Camp Blackwater. Marines who'd benefited from the knitting program were excited about its potential expansion, but losing Rebecca meant losing the innovative instructor who'd created something genuinely special in their isolated corner of the Syrian desert. Rebecca herself felt torn between pride in her accomplishments and attachment to the unit where she'd finally found acceptance and professional respect. The transfer represented career advancement and recognition for methods she'd developed through personal initiative, but it also meant leaving behind Marines who'd become genuine friends. "Ma'am, Rebecca addressed Colonel Hayes during her final briefing.
I'd like to request that Thompson and Kim be included in the curriculum development team. They've contributed essential insights that shouldn't be lost. Hayes considered the request with the pragmatic mind of a senior officer who understood that innovation often emerges from unexpected collaborations. Thompson's transformation from skeptic to advocate provided a valuable perspective on overcoming institutional resistance. Kim's documentation methods and research approach would be essential for validating results across different military populations. Approved, Hayes decided. We're going to build this program properly with input from everyone who contributed to its development. As Rebecca packed her equipment for transfer to Quantico, she carefully wrapped the purple yarn that had become legendary throughout Camp Blackwater. The simple fiber had traveled an impossible journey from craft supply to lethal weapon to symbol of innovation that would influence military training for generations. The memorial throw for Sergeant Collins was complete, ready for shipment to his widow, along with a letter explaining how her husband's sacrifice had inspired training methods that would save lives across the Marine Corps. In death, Collins had become part of something larger than any individual deployment or combat operation. Thompson approached Rebecca's quarters as she finished packing, carrying a small bundle wrapped in desert camouflage fabric. His expression was serious but warm, the look of a professional Marine saying goodbye to a respected colleague. "Martinez," he said formally, "the squad wanted you to have this." Inside the bundle was a tactical vest knitted from lightweight aramide fiber, custom-fitted to Rebecca's measurements and designed specifically for communication operations. The construction was flawless. 43 Marines had contributed to its creation, each adding stitches that represented their gratitude for lessons that extended far beyond knitting techniques. "It's bulletproof," Thompson added with obvious pride. Rodriguez researched the fiber specifications and Santos organized the group project. Turns out Marines can learn to knit anything if they understand its tactical applications. Rebecca examined the vest with growing amazement at the technical sophistication her students had achieved. The armor panels were seamlessly integrated into the knitted structure, creating protection that was lighter and more flexible than conventional body armor. More importantly, every stitch represented acceptance and respect from Marines who'd learned to see strength in forms they'd never imagined.
The helicopter that would carry Rebecca to her new assignment was scheduled to arrive within hours, but Camp Blackwater had been permanently changed by her presence. The knitting program would continue under Thompson's leadership, guided by documentation that would ensure its principles survived long after its founder's departure. In conference rooms at Marine Corps headquarters, senior officers were already discussing implementation of Martinez protocols across training commands worldwide. The phrase would become synonymous with innovative thinking that enhanced military effectiveness through unconventional methods. But at Camp Blackwater, surrounded by Marines who'd learned that excellence could emerge from the most unlikely sources, Rebecca understood that her greatest achievement wasn't the tactical applications she'd developed or the enemy combatant she'd eliminated with 8 seconds of perfect execution. Her greatest achievement was proving that judgment based on stereotypes could blind even professional Marines to extraordinary competence that existed right in front of them. 18 months later, the Marine Corps War College at Quantico hosted an event that would have seemed impossible before Operation Silent Thunder. The first annual conference on innovative tactical training methods drew representatives from every branch of the armed forces, NATO allies, and even civilian law enforcement agencies seeking to understand how fiber arts had become a cornerstone of modern military education. Rebecca Martinez, now holding the rank of Staff Sergeant and serving as Director of Cognitive Enhancement Training, stood before an auditorium filled with skeptical senior officers, elite special operations personnel, and academic researchers. The presentation she was about to deliver would either validate 18 months of intensive curriculum development or confirm the suspicions of traditionalists who viewed the entire program as elaborate nonsense. Behind her, a massive projection screen displayed performance statistics that told an undeniable story. Combat effectiveness ratings had increased by an average of 37% among units implementing Martinez protocols.
Equipment maintenance scores showed consistent improvement across all military occupational specialties. Most remarkably, psychological evaluation data indicated dramatic reductions in combat stress casualties and disciplinary incidents. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rebecca began, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who'd proven her methods under the most demanding conditions imaginable. "What you're seeing represents the largest improvement in military training effectiveness since the introduction of flight simulators." The audience included figures whose skepticism was legendary within military circles. General Robert Patterson, Commandant of the Marine Corps, had initially opposed the program as a waste of resources that diverted attention from proven training methods. Admiral Sarah Chen, Chief of Naval Operations, had publicly questioned whether activities associated with domestic life belonged in professional military education. Most prominently, Colonel Marcus Webb sat in the front row with the expression of someone attending his own professional execution. Webb had been Thompson's commanding officer during the Syrian deployment and had submitted multiple reports questioning the wisdom of allowing craft activities to influence combat training. His career had suffered significantly when Martinez protocols proved successful beyond anyone's expectations. "Colonel Webb," Rebecca addressed him directly, "you submitted 14 separate memoranda opposing implementation of cognitive enhancement training in your command. Would you care to share your current assessment?" Webb's discomfort was visible to everyone in the auditorium, but his response demonstrated the intellectual honesty that made him a respected officer despite his initial resistance to innovation. "Staff Sergeant Martinez, I was completely wrong. My opposition was based on preconceptions that prevented me from evaluating evidence objectively. Your methods have revolutionized training effectiveness in ways I didn't think possible." The admission carried weight precisely because it came from someone who'd been a vocal critic. Webb's conversion to supporting Martinez protocols had influenced other traditionalists who respected his judgment even when they disagreed with his conclusions. Rebecca advanced to the next section of her presentation, displaying video footage from recent training exercises that demonstrated practical applications of cognitive enhancement techniques. Marines moved through complex tactical scenarios with coordination and precision that exceeded previous standards, their performance enhanced by months of training that included advanced fiber arts instruction. "What you're observing isn't magic," Rebecca explained, as footage showed a Marine disarming an improvised explosive device while his spotter maintained surveillance through binoculars. "It's the result of systematic development of fine motor control, pattern recognition, and sustained concentration through activities that engage the same neural pathways required for tactical operations." Private First Class Jennifer Kim, now a sergeant and Rebecca's senior research assistant, approached the podium carrying documentation that represented 2 years of intensive data collection. Her transformation from anxious junior Marine to confident military researcher exemplified the personal development opportunities that Martinez protocols created for participants. Rebecca Martinez announced, stepping aside to allow her former student to address the distinguished audience. Kim's presentation was masterful, combining rigorous scientific methodology with practical examples that resonated with military professionals. She documented measurable improvements in everything from marksmanship accuracy to vehicle maintenance proficiency, building a case for cognitive enhancement training that satisfied even the most demanding academic standards. The neural pathways activated during complex knitting patterns are identical to those required for tactical decision-making under stress. Participants develop enhanced cognitive flexibility, improved working memory capacity, and increased ability to maintain focus during high-stress situations. The breakthrough research had been conducted in partnership with the Naval Medical Research Center, lending scientific credibility to training methods that had initially been dismissed as unserious. Functional MRI studies showed that Marines who completed 6 months of fiber arts training exhibited measurably different brain activation patterns during simulated combat scenarios. Corporal David Santos occupied a seat near the back of the auditorium, his dress blue uniform displaying ribbons that told the story of a young man who'd transformed his life through military service and unexpected educational opportunities. His current assignment as chief instructor for motor skills development represented a career path that wouldn't have existed before Martinez protocols proved their value.
Santos developed our most successful instructional techniques for working with Marines who initially resist non-traditional training methods, Rebecca announced, gesturing for him to join the presentation. His background provides unique insights into overcoming cultural barriers that prevent adoption of innovative approaches. Santos's contribution to the presentation focused on the social dynamics of learning environments and the importance of peer instruction in building acceptance for unfamiliar training concepts. His experience growing up in gang culture had provided unexpected preparation for understanding how group identity influences individual willingness to embrace new ideas. The key insight, Santos explained to the audience of senior officers, is that Marines will accept any training method if they understand its tactical applications and see respected leaders demonstrating its value. The problem isn't resistance to innovation, it's failure to connect innovation with military effectiveness. Lance Corporal Ashley Rodriguez, now serving as senior medical advisor for the program, presented findings that had revolutionary implications for military medicine. Her research documented therapeutic applications of fiber arts training for Marines recovering from traumatic brain injury, managing post-traumatic stress, and preparing for medical retirement from active duty. We've achieved remarkable success treating fine motor skill deficits resulting from traumatic brain injury, Rodriguez reported, displaying before and after videos of Marines whose hand coordination had been severely compromised by IED explosions. Traditional occupational therapy showed limited improvement, but structured knitting exercises produced measurable recovery within weeks. The medical applications had attracted attention from veterinary affairs hospitals nationwide, leading to pilot programs that were showing similar success with retired military personnel struggling with civilian transition challenges. The therapeutic benefits of productive manual activity were proving as valuable as the tactical training applications. But the most dramatic moment of the presentation came when Staff Sergeant Thompson approached the podium carrying a carefully preserved display case. Inside, mounted against black velvet, was the length of purple yarn that had ended an enemy combatant's life in 8 seconds of perfect tactical execution. This yarn represents everything we misunderstood about innovation and military effectiveness, Thompson announced, his voice carrying the conviction of someone who'd witnessed transformation that challenged his fundamental assumptions about professional competence. We mocked it because we couldn't see past our preconceptions about what military training should look like. Thompson's presence at the conference was itself remarkable, given that he'd been selected for promotion to Sergeant Major and assignment as Senior Enlisted Advisor for the program's expansion across all Marine Corps training commands. His evolution from skeptic to advocate had become legendary within military education circles. 18 months ago, I was convinced that Sergeant Martinez was undermining military discipline and introducing inappropriate civilian influences into combat preparation, Thompson continued, his gaze moving across the audience of senior officers. I couldn't have been more wrong about anything in my 20-year career. General Patterson, who'd been observing the presentation with the analytical mind that had earned him 4 stars, finally spoke from his position in the front row. Staff Sergeant Martinez, I need to understand the scalability of these methods. Can we implement Martinez protocols across the entire force structure without degrading other training priorities? Rebecca's response demonstrated the comprehensive planning that had characterized the program's development from its earliest stages. Implementation teams had already conducted successful pilot programs at 17 different training installations, adapting basic principles to accommodate various military occupational specialties and unit structures. Sir, we've developed modular curriculum packages that integrate with existing training schedules without requiring additional time or resources. The key is embedding cognitive enhancement activities into current programs rather than treating them as separate requirements. Admiral Chen raised the question that had concerned naval leadership since the program's inception. How do we ensure consistent quality control when instructors may lack expertise in fiber arts techniques? The answer came from Kim, whose research had addressed this exact challenge through development of standardized instructor certification programs.
Ma'am, we've created training packages that enable any competent military instructor to teach cognitive enhancement techniques, regardless of their personal background with fiber arts. The focus is on motor skill development and pattern recognition, rather than traditional craft knowledge. The certification programs had already graduated over 200 instructors from all service branches, creating a cadre of professionals capable of implementing Martinez protocols anywhere in the world. Quality assurance was maintained through regular evaluation and continuing education requirements that ensured consistent application of proven methods. As the presentation concluded, Rebecca faced questions from an audience that had arrived skeptical but was leaving convinced. The transformation was visible in their body language and the nature of their inquiries, no longer challenging the validity of the methods, but seeking practical guidance for implementation within their own commands. Colonel Webb's final question captured the essence of what the conference had accomplished. Staff Sergeant Martinez, what's the most important lesson for military leaders who want to foster this kind of innovation within their organizations? Rebecca's answer drew on 18 months of experience working with military professionals who'd overcome their initial resistance to unconventional training methods. Sir, the lesson is that excellence can emerge from any source if leaders maintain intellectual curiosity and evaluate results rather than appearances. We almost missed these opportunities because we were judging activities based on stereotypes instead of measuring their effectiveness. The conference concluded with announcements that would transform military training across multiple nations. Martinez protocols would become mandatory curriculum at all U.S. military academies within 12 months. NATO allies had committed to implementing pilot programs based on documented American success. Even civilian law enforcement agencies were developing adaptations for police training and emergency responder preparation. But for Rebecca, the most meaningful moment came during the reception following her presentation, when a young female Marine approached with obvious nervousness and a small bundle wrapped in military regulation paper. "Ma'am," the Marine said quietly, "I'm Private Wilson from the Communications School. I heard about your work and started knitting during off-duty hours. My instructors said it was improving my technical skills, so I made this for you." The bundle contained a communication cable organizer knitted from aramid fiber, designed specifically for the complex radio equipment that Rebecca used in her current assignment. The construction was flawless, tight, even stitches that would withstand field conditions while providing flexible organization for sensitive electronics.
"Outstanding work, Private," Rebecca replied, examining the piece with genuine admiration. "This represents exactly the kind of innovative thinking we're trying to encourage throughout the Corps." As the conference attendees dispersed to implement programs that would influence military training for decades, Rebecca reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her from a forward operating base in Syria to the pinnacle of military education innovation. The purple yarn that had once made her a target for ridicule had become the foundation for training methods that enhanced combat effectiveness across the entire armed forces. Thompson approached as she was packing her presentation materials, carrying a folder that contained their next assignment. "Martinez," he said with the grin of someone who'd learned to embrace challenges that defied conventional thinking, "you're going to love this. The Defense Department wants us to evaluate applications for special operations training." The folder contained preliminary research suggesting that cognitive enhancement techniques might provide significant advantages for elite military units whose missions required extraordinary precision and mental resilience. Initial studies indicated that special operations personnel who completed fiber arts training showed improved performance in high-stress scenarios that previously caused elevated failure rates. "6 months ago, I would have said you were crazy," Thompson added, studying mission parameters that would have seemed impossible before Martinez protocols proved their value. "Now I'm wondering what other training innovations we're missing because we're not thinking creatively enough." Rebecca smiled as she accepted the new assignment, understanding that her journey from mocked communication specialist to revolutionary training developer was really just the beginning. The principles she discovered through personal necessity had applications that extended far beyond military organizations, with potential to enhance human performance in any field requiring precision, focus, and coordination under pressure. The purple yarn that had strangled an enemy scout in 8 seconds had become something far more powerful. Proof that innovation could emerge from the most unexpected sources if people maintained the courage to look beyond their preconceptions and measure results rather than appearances. In Damascus, where insurgent operations had been permanently disrupted by intelligence gathered during Operation Silent Thunder, children played safely in streets that had been battle zones before a Marine's knitting hobby became a tactical weapon. At Camp Blackwater, Marines continued clicking needles during evening hours, their projects ranging from tactical gear improvements to memorial pieces honoring fallen comrades. And in research laboratories across the United States, scientists studied brain imaging data that revealed how simple, repetitive motions could enhance cognitive capabilities in ways that would revolutionize human performance training across multiple disciplines. The mockery had ended. The legend had just begun. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.